gives you a warning, but I'm giving you a warning. I'm recording it. And that records me. It does not record you. So throughout the presentation, if you have questions, there is a chat box in the bottom right corner. You can click that. You can type a chat in. I'll try to keep an eye on it. It is just me. There's no one else from the high school on here. So I'll do my best to answer questions that are in there. And we'll also have time at the end of today's presentation to handle questions as well. So with no further delay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Give me just a second. And I'm going to just drop the link for the presentation in the chat box. For those who do prefer to open that on their own device, you can do that if you want. And we're going to go ahead and get going. Okay, so you should be able to see now. So let's go ahead and get going. So when we're talking about what are the goals of the college application process, besides the obvious goal of being admitted to college and being able to start going there in the fall of 2023, I've got some other goals for you in the process to make this an easier process for you, something more manageable and less stressful. So some of the things that we're thinking about are being well organized so that you can minimize the number of unique applications that you need to submit. You're going to find, students, as you start working on your applications, that there's a lot of information that you're putting the same information in each application that you do. So if you minimize the number of forms that you're completing, even if you're still applying to a good number of colleges, it can save you a lot of work on kind of the monotonous, easy stuff. We also want to be able to minimize the number of unique essays that you need to write. While most schools do require one main essay, a lot of other schools do require additional either short answer essays or longer essays. It varies by the school. Sometimes it's just one, sometimes it's 3 or 4. So by having a good view when you start the process of where you're applying and doing the homework up front about looking at those essays, you can minimize the number of completely unique essays that you need to write. You'll need to make some modifications to each of them to personalize them to the school. But if you're able to kind of get a theme going, it'll make your life easier as you're going from one school to the next. We also want to, of course, get everything done on time. Unlike lots of other things that are school related, there really are no exceptions to deadlines in the college application process. So, I always try to get students to plan to get it done a little bit earlier also, so that if things happen that are outside your control, you're still safe. You're still going to get that application in on time with a little bit less stress than those who may have waited till the last minute. We want to keep that list manageable and balanced, whatever that means for you. And of course, do our best possible job on each application. We don't want to get that list so far out of control that we're kind of not doing our best work on each application, because then you've really kind of wasted your time putting that application together, because it's probably not going to give you the result that you're hoping for. So one of the things that was confusing to students in last year's process was how SCOIR really fits into the process, and whether or not they needed SCOIR and how it kind of related to the actual application itself. So SCOIR essentially in the application process gives us one place that we process everything. It's where your students, where you're going to tell us, the counselors, where you have applied, and then and how you applied, which application form, what your deadlines are, and then we'll be able to tell from that what needs to be sent out. And then we will, in turn, send out the materials from the high school using SCOIR. So it's a required piece of the process. You really can't avoid it. For the first time this year, some students will also be using SCOIR to apply to college because they have acquired the coalition application. And that's new this year. So if you have friends from last year who say, hey, yeah, no, you don't use SCOIR to apply, that was true for them. It may or may not be true for you, depending upon where you're applying and which application forms you'll be using. And I'll talk about that more as we go. Also, in SCOIR, it really enhances transparency in the process, both from you to us, but also from us to you, because you'll find that you're able to see when your school counselor has sent out your documents, and it gives you a record of that, which allows you to be a better advocate if you're finding that the information has not arrived at the school on time. All right. So how can we go ahead and get started? So as you get your schools together, you're going to want to find some way to organize information about them. And I've got a link to a college application tracker here that you can utilize. It's also, students, linked in the My Drive section of your SCOIR profile. So if you log into your SCOIR account, you'll be able to see it there. When you click on it, it's going to look like this, which will allow you to make a copy that goes automatically to your drive. Then you don't have to worry that you're like messing up my copy or that other students can see what you're doing. Once you have a copy, this is what I've put together, but it doesn't have to stay like this. You can modify this for your needs based on where you're applying and how you're applying. So if maybe you're somebody who has audition requirements or you've got some other kind of special programs that you're applying to at schools, it will enable you to go ahead and edit that information so that it works for you. But really, this is just a starter, really, for you to get to start to get organized. I've got the items on the left that might be required, and across the top, I've got the schools where you can list the names of your schools. You can modify this to work for you. If this doesn't work for you, it's not logical for you, don't use it. Create something on your own. You can use some type of notes app if that works for you. You can use paper if that's really what works best for you. Honestly, I don't care. I just want you to get organized. You will find that as you're going, things can get out of control a little bit quickly. While there are some things that are common about the application process, there's lots of little minutia that differs from school to school. So the first thing you want to do, and this is a great time of year to start to do it, is to take that list of schools that are on your definite list, go to their websites, look for information for first-year students, and your goal is to find a checklist. So, for instance, I'm going to pull up two just so I can show you some of the things that differ and what you're looking for. So this is the one for UDEL. It lets you know what you need to do to apply to UDEL. You need to apply online. Right here is a tip-off that they take both the common application or the coalition application. There's an application fee, and that $75, folks, is right around average for what things, the going rate these days. What you'll see here is you notice that there's no mention of a transcript, and that's because University of Delaware doesn't require a transcript. They're one of the schools that requires a self-reported academic record. Rutgers is another really popular school that requires a self-reported academic record. What that is that means that the onus is on the student as part of the application process to report all of the courses that they have taken over the last 3 years, the names of those courses, the grades they got in them. Basically, you're regurgitating the information that's on the transcript. Why do schools do that? Honestly, it saves them work. It's not about making the process really easier for you. It's really about making it easier for them on their side, because now you've already done all of the data entry for them so that they can, run averages however they want. Do they want to run academic, GPA averages? Do they want to factor in all your courses? What do you want to do? It allows them to take care of all of that. But it does put a little bit more work on you, and different schools require that you do it differently. So UDEL has a process that uses the same self-reporting academic form as Rutgers and Penn State and Pitt and some other schools, which is really helpful because for those you only need to type in the info once, but there's kind of like a little bit extra that you need to do for each of the individual schools, and you do that after the process, after you submit your application. For other schools, you'll submit your courses and grades as part of the application, perhaps as part of the common application. For other schools, there's a different form that you use. So there's a lot of variation there, and as I said, starts to get overwhelming quickly. Here, you'll see that UDEL also mentions they've got standardized test scores. So on the application that you apply with, you'll indicate for schools whether you want to apply with scores or without scores. And then if you're applying with scores, you've got to submit them in some way. So it's important to take note of how that is. Are you submitting official scores, which you have to send from the College Board or from ACT to each school? And of course, that involves paying for each one. Or do they accept self-reported ones? So here you'll see that University of Delaware takes self-reported scores. That's great for you. You can self-report them on the application, or in UDEL's case, I know that they'll take that as well on the self-reported academic record. You can do it there. That's great for you. It also saves $12 a pop. And it also gives you a little bit more control over it. It's a little stressful for students sometimes that they go online to the College Board website, they request that scores go, and then they impatiently wait and keep refreshing and waiting for the scores to go, because while you would think it's automatic and happens immediately, it does not. It takes 2 to 3 weeks for that to happen. And then when those scores get to the college end, it takes more time for them to load them in and add them to your record. So the nice part of its self-reports is that you're controlling the fact that it's already done when you submit your application. So it's a little bit of a stress off your shoulders, in addition to saving you a couple bucks. Another thing that they mention here is they mention a form, a secondary school report. That is something that happens automatically. So it's something you don't have to stress about for any of your schools. We do it, we send it, we know what schools need it because SCOIR tells us. And then they take one letter of recommendation, but we'll take more if you want to send more. Other schools are a little bit different. This is University of Southern California. They've got a little checklist here. They note that they require official test scores, right? So that means that we have to send them. They also note that they use the highest scores, so they use that super score. So this is a place that some schools might note what that policy is, and they require transcripts. And they also note that they've got some different requirements for different majors. So this is why it's important to not just rely on information from third-party sites, even SCOIR, about what's required, because it may not be taking into account information that's specific to the program that you are applying for. So there might be some, different procedures. So it's always good to go straight to the source and go right to the school's website. So that's what you're kind of want to do for each of your schools, and pull that information together first. This is the type of information you're looking for. I just highlighted a bunch of things, but some other things you might want to look for at this time: scholarship policies, scholarship deadlines, whether or not there's a separate application. You can go ahead and jot down what financial aid forms they require. So is it just the FAFSA, or do they also require the CSS profile to be considered? Take a look at that stuff. It'll allow you, you have the time now. And parents, this is something that you can help support your students with this part of the process as well. All right, so before we go any further, before we open up applications now and start kind of like randomly completing things, you want to take a look at that information you just pulled together and start grouping the schools together. In general, most of our students use the Common Application for the bulk of their college applications. Not all schools accept the Common Application. I believe it's up to 900 and something schools that accept the Common App. Rutgers is a very popular school that does not accept the Common Application. But odds are, as you start to look at your list, you're going to find a lot of them take the Common App, and that's one that a lot of students are comfortable with, and they're able to work through that process fairly easily. So most students are probably going to use that one. You may find that you also need to use additional applications. So there's another group application out there. It's called the Coalition Application. Rutgers is part of it. The University of Washington is part of it. Currently, that is the only way to apply to UW unless they change that application process this year. There's been some rumors that they might join onto the Common App. We'll find out in a few weeks. But all of the other schools that are on the Coalition Application also take some other type of application. It may be the Common App, it may be the school application, an individual school application, or a group application, like in the case of University of Texas, where it's Applied Texas. But this year, Coalition Application is getting rid of their own standalone site, and they are going to be merging in with SCOIR. I have a high degree of confidence that it's going to go pretty well. But that being said, I'm not a huge early adopter of technology. I probably would not be rushing to do it on August 1st and trying to submit my application in August. I would probably let some of those kinks be worked out a little bit, both on the end of SCOIR, but also on the end of the colleges, because it's a technology upgrade on their part as well to handle the received applications. So I'd probably try not to be first, because I'll tell you now, no one's getting a cookie for submitting their application first. And then there, as I mentioned, there's other types of applications that you can use as well. When do some of these things open? The Common Application is open now. You can start working on your Common Application, and I'll show you which parts not to do yet, because what's going to happen is the Common App will close later this month for a couple days and roll over to next year's cycle, which is the year you guys want. Coalition Application, you got to hold off until August, at least. School applications, Rutgers in the past has opened in early September, but last year I think they bumped it up a little bit and opened in mid-August, so that might be possible this year. Pitt's a real early one. They're usually ready to go on their own website, and that tends to be one of the schools that students apply to on the early side because they have rolling admissions, and for some students it can be very relieving to know in October or November that they've gotten into a college that they really like. The University of California application for students looking to apply there, that has a very specific window of time. At one point it opens, at some point in the fall, you can start working on it, but it can only be submitted during the month of November. So it's a little bit funny. That's the University of California and the Cal State system. All right, so getting started. As we're going to work on applications, and we're going to talk about that more in a little bit, but when we talk about the process, there are some things that you have to do for each school that you apply to, some things that are a little bit more labor intensive. But then there are other things that I call my one and done list, things that you can do potentially now and remove them from your plate so that students, you don't have to really think about them anymore. You might have to kind of monitor that someone else takes care of their thing, but like you can let it get out of your brain so it can stop taking up brain space. That will be helpful for you in the fall. You'll be really glad that you've got some of these things off your plate so that you can really concentrate on your application, your extracurricular lists, and those essays that you're writing, and that whole, school, club, sports thing that you'll be back to doing in the beginning of September as well. So some things to do now: adding schools to your applying list in SCOIR. You want to try to get those things working on during the summer. Working on that brag sheet, and parents, you can do the parent point of view. Those are both found in the same place in SCOIR on the survey screen. Making sure that those teachers that you ask for recommendations, that you go ahead and enter those requests into SCOIR if you didn't do that already. Completing your activities section in SCOIR, because your school counselors will use that in the writing of their letters of recommendations when we return back to school. And there will also be a FERPA waiver that you can do in SCOIR, and that's something that you can do right now as well. So these are all things that you can do during the summer and not really have to come back to them. And by having this stuff done, now you've shifted things over so that the teachers have the information they need to write their letters of recommendation, and also your counselors will have the information that they need to write your letters of recommendation as well. When we come back, I always ask students, once transcripts come back up in late August or in early September, pull up your transcript, check it for accuracy, make sure everything's correct before we start sending it out, especially if you took things out of Hillsborough High School. You want to make sure that they hit the transcript correctly. Folks, there will also be a transcript release form that will be part of the forms that come up in Genesis. Whenever that happens, late July, early August kind of time frame, you'll see that one in there. You'll do it with the other ones, and just grant permission for us to send your students' transcript information out to colleges, scholarship sites, etc. That keeps you from having to sign off and okay on things one at a time, which, believe me, is a big waste of your time as well. Then you can go ahead and create your application account. So you can go to do it now. You can go to commonapp.org. Don't forget, next week I'll be doing a walkthrough of that application. When you're doing any applications, you want to use a personal email address, not your school email address. As I mentioned, Common App is going to close for a couple days at the end of the month. I just want to show you very, very quickly what I'm talking about when I tell you which information to stick with. I'm just going to go to the Common App real quick. I already have an account. My account will look very slightly different from yours because it's a practice account. Yours should not ever say practice. When you create your account, you want to indicate students that you'll be starting in fall 2023. That will ensure that the information rolls over to next year's process. So when you guys come in here, you're going to see that this is blank. There's going to be nothing on your dashboard. I would probably just leave it that way until August 1st, because spoiler alert, between the 28th and the 1st, all of this information gets blown away. And so there's no use putting it there when it's all going to disappear anyway and may change. What you can work on is the information that is on this main Common App tab. This is the information that goes to all of the schools that you're applying to using the Common App. Then after August 1st, you can go in and you can start adding schools, which will show up on your My Colleges list. Each of these schools has some individual school-specific information that you'll need to submit. You'll see right now it is all really geared towards the 2022 year, which is why I said all this information gets blown away. Schools can change their essay questions. So schools that have additional essays, this is the kind of section you'll find them in, either in questions, or there might be an indication that there's a supplemental section like this, a writing supplement. This is where you'll find that, but it can change. If you're super eager to start working on those things, check those schools' social media accounts. Some schools have been Sharing that type of information. I just saw today that Georgia Tech shared their question for next year and some tips on writing it. I got stuff up from Emory today as well. So some schools are putting it out there so you can start working on it, but keep it out of here because this information is going to get blown away. So that's something that you can do. And the reason I suggest that you do that before you get too anxious about moving schools in SCOIR is because when you go to move your schools in SCOIR, I'm just going to hop back over to that real quick. When I go to move a school from my following list to applying, it asks me some questions. It asks me how I want to apply. And when I say common application, it asks me for my common ID. That, my friends, is this number in the top corner of your common application. And I'll remind you of this, but it's super helpful for you to get that in because what happens is when materials are submitted to the colleges, they can easily use that number to match the documents that we send to your application file. It speeds things up. We found this year that when documents were not matched, it was because the student had not entered their Common App ID or had entered it incorrectly. So perhaps, entered their siblings on the wrong account or things like that. Once you put it in here once in SCOIR for one of your schools, for each of the next schools that you do, it's already going to be in there. So it's another kind of one and done thing. So it's nice to create your account. Even if you don't do anything in here, once you have it, you're good to go. You can paste it in here for all of your schools and know that you took care of that. Then you'll also indicate how you're applying. So, now everybody's got, great dreams of getting out early applications. So we can check early action perhaps, because we're hoping to get it out well before that regular decision date. And then we hit save. And then it moves it over here to our applying list. Once you apply, you'll move it over here. So I like to drag, but you can also use the 3 dots if you really want to. Another thing that you can do when you first come into SCOIR, you might have noticed that I had a box there and it said FERPA waiver. I think I probably need to log out to get back to it because I can never get there on my own. And when you first log in, there's a box. And you should probably be seeing it when you log in. It says FERPA waiver. What FERPA is, it's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. I promise there's no quiz. No one's ever going to ask you what that is. But the basic gist of it is that it really comes down to being about letters of recommendation for most students. And what it refers to is whether or not you want to keep the right to be able to see your letters of recommendation at the school you attend once you're a student there. It's rarely recommended by colleges, by me, by the rest of our counselors. We prefer to see students waive that right and say, yeah, I'm cool with the fact that I'm not going to see those things. Doing that assures college admission counselors that the information they're receiving, the letters of recommendation are authentic, that they're confidential, that they haven't been influenced by the student and what they're going to write. So that's why we recommend that students waive it. You'll need to do that, students, here in SCOIR. And again, you could do it now. You just hit granted, you hit sign and continue, it's done. You're never going to have to worry about it again. And then you'll also have to do it in the common application as well. And I'll remind folks of that later on. You can't submit the Common App without it, so you'll have to do it. But again, one of those things you can't do until after August 1st. But I do want to, kind of give you the idea about it. And it is a little bit confusing. I know FERPA, FAQs, they both start with F. They're both 5-letter acronyms. It'll get a little bit confusing, and there's a lot of other acronyms in the process. So just ask, but hopefully this is enough to kind of make you remember that, like, hey, I think she said something about this. I should look it up. All right, and then we talked about adding those colleges. Your timeline for doing that, students, is that now is a great time. If you already have a core list of schools you're planning to apply to, go ahead and put them on there. I would err towards early action deadlines if that's what you're hoping to do. For some of those schools, you can always change it and move those deadlines back later if that's what you want. As a reminder, this My Colleges screen is really kind of like the bulk of where you're going to be working for this year. You're going to be dragging schools back and forth. This application documents is where you request those teacher letters of recommendation if you didn't do that yet. It is a way you can get back to the early decision agreement, and I'll reference that in a little bit. Fee waivers for students who are qualified for fee waivers because they are free and reduced lunch eligible. That is all up here in the application documents. It is also a place, students, that you'll be able to see when your teacher has uploaded your the letter of recommendation that you've requested. So it would show up in here as a status. You'd wind up seeing that it's been uploaded there. So, and I think you get an email about it too. So that's kind of how you can keep track of what's going on there. Talked about moving these schools, and everything is there. I wanted to have a little bit of time now to talk about the different types of ways that you can apply. Early decision, early action, regular decision enrolling. You'd probably notice that you had to pick that. I mentioned, probably a good idea to pick an earlier deadline as of now, and that's fine. But the things you want to be careful about are things like early decision. So early decision is the binding one. That is the one where students apply, they're going to be going. So you need to determine if early decision is right for you. And just because it's right for maybe some of your friends and maybe some of your family members doesn't mean that it's the right decision for you. It needs to be, if you're applying ED to a school, it needs to really be a place that you are in love with and thrilled to attend, and not just a place you're kind of meh about. Because if you get in, your process is done. And that is a school you're going to be attending. And so it's important that you've done a lot of research about that school. You really ideally need to have visited. I want to see students be able to name 5 specific, clear reasons why that is the perfect match for them. And especially with more selective schools where I see students, students really wanting to apply early decision, and sometimes they haven't visited. Sometimes the reasons are because it's a good school, because it's highly ranked. Those are not specific and clear reasons. And I'll tell you, when students have that kind of superficial level of knowledge about a school, it's super obvious on the application. And, really, they're not strong competitive applicants in the process to those highly selective schools, especially during the ED rounds, where students really, really are aware of the specifics of the school. So you need that stuff in order to be able to successfully complete your application. Also here I mentioned something called hooks. So sometimes that's things like being a legacy. Sometimes that is the time that it is most helpful in the process. It may be being an athlete, it may be a first generation student. And this may be the time in the process where those things most benefit you, may be applying ED. And so there are some schools, for instance, UPenn, that legacy is only taken into account in the ED process. They don't look at it during regular decision. So sometimes that might be a reason a student wants to go ahead and pull that ED trigger. Also recruited athletes. Often students who are being recruited will get some pressure from their coaches to apply early decision, either during early decision 1, and those deadlines are usually around November 1st, or early decision 2, which some schools have, and that just ED2 deadlines usually in between January 1st, January 15th kind of time frame. Another thing that really matters for early decision, can you pay? Because when you apply early decision, you're going to find out in the December timeframe that you've gotten in. You don't have other schools that you've really applied to, gotten responses from, and have financial aid packages from. So you have zero leverage in terms of financial aid. You can't compare packages. There's not really much negotiation that can go on. So you need to be sure that you're going to be able to handle whatever that financial aid package looks like. I really recommend students and families to do that FAFSA forecaster. And also the school's net price calculator. If you want to know how to find that, for instance, NYU, just Google NYU net price calculator, it'll come up. And that'll give you an idea about what your financial aid package is going to look like. It also gives you a tiny, small bit of leverage, because if your financial aid if you enter things correctly and then your aid package looks really different, at least now you have a starting point to have a conversation with the financial aid office. If you haven't done that, then you really haven't helped yourself at all in being able to talk to them about any possible aid that they're willing to give you. Also, you might want to consider if there's a big statistical advantage to that particular school. I'm not going to lie, some schools it's very helpful to apply early decision. Tulane is one of them. There are some schools that fill nearly 50% of their class with early decision applicants. That being said, still needs to be the right place for you, or not really a great place to use your ED. Just to give you some idea about how many HHS students are actually applying ED, because students, I can tell you, when we get to October, particularly if you're in honors or AP classes, there's a lot of chatter and you'll start to feel like everybody but you is applying early decision, and that is not at all the case. Last year, we had 73 students apply early decision 1 to 34 different schools. Of those 73, 25 of them were accepted and enrolled. Those schools vary in selectivity: Cornell, Fairfield, Syracuse, NYU, Stevens, definite. Some of those students would have gotten in without early decision. Some of them, it really, schools like NYU and Cornell, it would have been a toss-up, because they're always a toss-up as to whether students are going to get in. But some students sometimes just want to be done with the process, even though they know that it's a probable school for them. They just want to be over it. And it's nice to get that early acceptance solidified in December. About a third of our students who were, of that 25, were recruited athletes. So that leaves about 17, 18 regular old HHS students who were admitted to their early decision schools. Of the 73, 11 were deferred. So the term deferred, you'll hear that during the process, whether you're applying ED or early action. And what deferred means is, we've reviewed your application, but we can't make a decision at this time, so we are going to push you to the regular decision pool. And you'll find out in March or April if you got in. Generally, students who are deferred from early decision, it means you're still in the game, you still have a chance. Odds are not great. Odds are also good that it's a really highly selective school, which also makes your odds not that great. Of our 11 that were deferred, 1 was ultimately accepted this year, the others were not. 43 of them were denied, so that gives you some kind of idea of what we're talking about. Some of those students then had a clear second choice, and they chose to apply early decision 2. And there were some other students who kind of came out of nowhere and decided that they had a first choice, and they applied early decision 2. And we had 21 students apply that way, and 9 of those students were accepted. So that kind of gives you an idea about what we're really talking about in terms of real numbers and who's actually applying ED. What more students are doing is applying early action, which is a much better plan for most. Other than a couple of schools that like to be special, for most schools, early action is kind of leaves a whole lot of choice in your court. You can apply, for the most part, to many schools early action. You do not have to go if you get into a school that you applied early action. You may receive admission benefits by applying early action, sometimes benefits like priority housing or other things like that, but also, I'll be honest, sometimes a greater likelihood of admission. There are some schools for which I strongly encourage all students who are planning to apply early action. Penn State, main campus, your best chance of acceptance there is always early action. I have seen students with 102, 103 GPAs who have been denied or accepted to a branch campus during regular decision, and that would not have happened had they applied early action. University of Maryland, they accept about 80, 85% of their class through early action. Purdue is another place where I see funky stats like those Penn State stats, where I think a student probably would have been admitted regular, but were not during early action. And if you have questions, folks, please type them into the chat box. That makes it easier for me to be able to track and not lose time, so we can all keep going. So the nice part about early action, though, is that, like I said, you still got choice. Now, I said there were a couple of exceptions. There's a policy out there called single choice early action. And single choice early action applies to Yale, Princeton, Stanford. I might be missing someone. They've got this special policy where if you apply their single choice early action, you can't apply to other private schools under their early action programs, but you can apply to public schools early action. So I tell students, if you're looking to do those schools, I think Harvard has it as well. Let me know. We can look at your schools and devise a game plan and make sure you're not breaking any rules. Georgetown also has a little bit of funky rules. Theirs is that if you're applying early action there, you can't also ED anywhere else. Nobody else has funky rules. It's just a small handful of schools, but I try to catch students as they're going through the process and make sure, look over what they've got in SCOIR and make sure it doesn't look like they're breaking any of the rules, that they're playing by the rules of the game. Who probably shouldn't apply early action? Students who need or want to test more to improve their academic profile. They may want to apply to some of their school's regular decision. Sometimes students are applying early decision to one school and they don't want to send out too many other early action applications. They want to hold off until December and then apply regular decision. RD is regular decision, or rolling decision is used for both of them. But those deadlines are a little bit later, usually in the January timeframe for most schools. Let's say you really had a really shaky junior year. Early action may not be to your benefit. Because senior grades might help your application. And in that case, sometimes it's better for students to hold off, allow the first semester grades to finalize, and so that way when the school is first looking at your application, they already have your senior grades on top of it. So sometimes students are worried that, you know what, if the most recent thing that they're seeing is some not so great grades, I might not even get deferred. They might just deny me early on. So maybe it's better to go regular decision. Also, your application's not ready. You're a ball of stress. We're getting into late October. You might think now that's not going to happen to me, but it will happen to some of you, because every year I'm talking to students in late October who are feeling the pressure to apply to early action, but they're really just not ready. And I give you permission to not send it out if it's not your best work, because again, you're just wasting those applications, sending things out that aren't looking that good. Give you kind of an idea about what we're looking at here. Last year, 359 of our students sent out early action applications. We sent out over 1,800 applications through early action last year, so a lot. And in total, we send out about 4,500 applications each year from Hillsborough High School. Then we've got regular enrolling. Those, for most schools, are kind of in the December-January timeframe. Some notables, Rutgers. Regular decision deadline is December 1st. Penn State, it's also December 1st. And, those are kind of some of the other ones. Most of the others are really right after Christmas break. And believe me, if you have talked to students and parents who are older than you, you will hear that I send out periodic emails like every 2 weeks that are very clear, bullet points, exactly what you should be doing now, keeping you on track so that you don't miss any of these things. Because I'll be honest, it's a lot of information. It's the first time for many of you. It's not your whole job like it is my whole job. And I don't really expect anybody to be able to keep track of all of this stuff. So I try to help you and keep you on track throughout to make sure you get to the other end. Now, I have a couple of questions that kind of came up that were related to this stuff that I'm going to go ahead and answer now. I answered about regular decision. I saw someone pop up there about what happens if you get deferred. For most schools, it'll just be automatic that they'll consider you for regular decision, but some schools will say like, hey, you need to complete this form and provide us any updates. So when students get deferred, not only they go to regular decision, we almost always have to send them mid-year grades, but most schools will also give you an opportunity to update other things about your application at that point. And I walk students through doing something called an email or letter of continued interest at that point about providing updates that have happened since they submitted their application. So it's something that I do as part of our process. So we'll talk about it when we kind of get to that December kind of time frame and decisions start rolling in. Also, someone asked for early action. Do we have to apply to all schools early action? Can you pick and choose? If you're ED, can you only apply to one school and not apply to others? So for early action, you can pick and choose. So you're probably going to have some schools you apply early action to and some schools you apply regular decision to. That will save you sanity as well, because it'll allow you to timeline out things a little bit throughout the course of the fall. For ED, in most cases, a student can apply early decision and can apply to other early action schools as well during that waiting period. But that being said, which ones you apply to, there are some that are worth applying to. I always encourage students, if you're applying to ED to a school, go ahead and send in your Rutgers application as well for early action, because you'll get an earlier answer for that. Penn State, Maryland, Purdue, I always want to see students go for that. Anywhere that also has an early scholarship application deadline, Indiana University comes to mind, send those in. For schools where there's no other advantage to doing it, well, maybe you want to hold off and do those applications once you get a response from your ED school in December. So, we kind of go through things and decide on an individual basis what makes the most sense for each student. Some other things that I wanted to mention in SCOIR is that there is a college checklist in there that students can use if they would like to keep track of what they have done for each individual school. It's up to you. You're not required to, but some students did find that helpful this year. That's just if you click on the tile for the school, you can find it. Also, I mentioned earlier, you'll be able to keep track of what we've sent out. That'll also be on this tile. And I'll remind students of that later, but I know that that also gives students and families a good degree of confidence that like things are moving, things are done. It makes it seem a little bit less like a black box. So we're going to go a little bit further here, and we're going to talk about now who actually sends what and when and how. So students, you do your applications. As part of your applications, you submit your essays. We mentioned before, some schools need self-reported grades. You do that too. No matter how they want the test scores, you do that. We don't own your test scores, you do, so you always send them. Mid-year grades, it depends, and we worry about it when we get to January. Hillsborough, we send your transcript if it's needed by the school. We send any reports, like a secondary school report that is needed by the school. We send a counselor's letter of recommendation for schools that accept and require it. And we extend teacher letters of recommendation for schools that require those as well. Now, how does all this stuff happen? How do you do stuff? Students, I think it's pretty obvious how we do our application and essays, perhaps on the common application, perhaps the coalition, perhaps the school-specific app. We talked about how to send SAT scores and self-reported grades. If you're applying early decision, there will also be an early decision agreement that you need to do. I'll send out reminders when we get to the beginning of the year. Don't stress about it now. No benefit to getting it done now. Very often the student changes between now and November 1st, whether or not they're going to early decision or where they're going to early decision. So we worry about that when it gets a little bit closer. Just know that there's an agreement out there that everybody has to agree, that they understand the rules of early decision. Students, if you're applying to a portfolio-based program, something that requires a pre-screen or an audition, that's all on you as well. And financial aid forms are all on you folks as well. FAFSA, CSS profile, etc. That all comes to you. Now, what do we send? We talked about how we send it. How do we send it? We send those things through SCOIR. How do we know when to do it? When you move a school to the applied column, students, once you've hit submit on the application, you're going to move it from applying to applied. We get notified, and that's how we know to get working on it. That being said, there are only so many deadlines out there. There's October 15th, November 1st, November 15th, December 1st, January 1st-ish are kind of the main deadlines. We don't wait for you to move those things necessarily over to applied for us to start working on it. But you need to have the school at least on the applying list so that we know it's coming. That gives your school counselors at least 2 weeks before the deadline, because there's a whole lot of prioritizing that goes on the parts of the teachers and also the counselors to get everybody's stuff on time. So we start running lists. It'll be October 1st. We're going to start running lists, see who has deadlines coming up that are October 15th, so that the counselors can work on those things. Hopefully, they've already got your brag sheet, your activities, et cetera, so they can work on those letters of recommendation. If not, you know where you're going, to the bottom of the pile, because you haven't done what you need to do for them to be ready. Once we get to about 10 days out, if your stuff's not done, now you're jeopardizing our ability to get your things out on time, and we may very well have to tell you it's not going to happen, and that's because you haven't done your part. If your stuff is done 2 weeks before, we will get your stuff on time, out on time. We have not missed deadlines, and we don't plan on doing it now. But again, requires that you do your part. This is a general flow for those that are a little more visual. As to what happens, we start up at the left, we go around. This is all the stuff in green is stuff the students are doing. Magic trigger is moving things to applied. That's when we start pushing things out the door. And where things finish, students, is that you have a follow-up on the other end. After you apply, schools are going to send you links to portals for you to check your application status. Only you can do that. And that's where you'll be able to start seeing things showing up as received. It's not immediate. It usually takes schools a couple of weeks to get through all their documents and process everything, but you got to kind of check there and make sure that things ultimately show up as received. That's on your end. And if it's not, we can help, kind of fix that situation between you and the school and us, and getting everything in it. Why does it matter when I add the school? Because like I said, we're prioritizing, and the teachers are doing the same thing. We send out a lot of applications by November 1st, a lot, like more than 1,500. And once we get to mid-October, if your requests are not in there and your schools are not in there and people don't see that you have a November 1st deadline, no one's touching your stuff, because your stuff is not going to get touched until after we get those November 1st things out, because again, the goal is to get everybody's stuff out on time. So there's no sneaky, like moving things at the last minute. You need to have everything in there. You will get 5 million reminders, but you've got to do it, and you need to communicate with your counselor and teachers as well. If perhaps you've got all regular decision or rolling schools, but you're planning to apply really early, you need to let them know, because they may kind of keep bumping you down to the priority list a little bit. But if you let them know, they can group you in with some of the earlier students. Some things about timelines. We don't recommend that you submit your applications before mid-September. Why? One, sometimes there are problems on the college's end in terms of processing some of those first applications, because things may have changed on their end, and that may cause you extra stress. Two, you do not currently know what classes you are taking this year. You know what you requested, you don't know what you're taking. You won't know until the end of August. Then school will start. You'll go to some of those classes and say, yeah, I don't really like them, I want out. And then you want to change your classes. So now you're changing some of the information you've put on your application. And it's nice to not have to do that. It's nice to be able to give them accurate information and not have to keep supplying updates to colleges for things that you've changed. Also, we're not able to start sending your transcript out until after ad drop. So that is kind of like mid to late September kind of timeframe is when we will start sending your transcript out. That is because, again, every time you make a change, we got to send another transcript out. And let's be honest, with the number of changes that are happening, the number of students that each counselor has, that scheduling stuff has to happen first before we can shift gears to the college application process portion of our jobs, or at least everybody else's. Mine, it's my whole job, but everybody else, has to get the other stuff done first before they can switch to it. And again, as long as you've done what you need to do, we're going to get things out on time. As you're working on your applications, you've probably got a link from me recently to my Common Application Help Guide. Keep this thing open while you are working on your applications in the month of July and August. It's going to answer probably like 75% of your questions as you're going through. Probably also a good idea to pop open this presentation as well. There's going to be some review of what we talked about, because you're not going to remember everything we talked about. I've been talking for 50 minutes. Who really remembers? Some of the most frequent things that come up, I just answered it like 3 times today for students who are working on their applications. No, your class size is not exactly 600. No, it doesn't matter. We go with a nice round number, because what the number is today will be different from tomorrow, will be different from next Monday. So that changes a lot. So we kind of stick with that nice 600 so you don't have to keep going in and make changes. When you're doing anything, unless they ask specifically for unweighted, I always recommend using your weighted GPA, which is that number that's on your transcript. You'll also see it in your SCOIR account, because I did update those for your class year. So you should see it in there. That should be accurately updated to your end of junior year GPA number. Our GPA scale is 100. We are not moving things over to a 4.0 scale. We are always reporting on that 100-ish point scale. Rank, we don't rank, we don't release rank. Colleges don't get a rank from us, so that's not being used. We also don't report middle school grades when things ask for them. So this is just some stuff that comes up often, so that hopefully some of this kind of like sticks in your head. Because we don't give high school credit for middle school courses, you don't report them ever. We always recommend you waive your rights on the FERPA. When you're working on the Common Application, never put any teacher or counselor's email address in there. That's kind of the sum up of the process. We'll get to the specifics after August 1st, but never put anyone's email in there, because we're not sending anything through the Common App. This is the only kind of little bit confusing part of the process, but I'll send things out that walk you through that when we get to after August 1st. I don't want to do it now, because we're not touching it until after August 1st. Early decision agreement, again, that happens in the Common App. Now, I mentioned the Coalition app. Again, it's going to come up on August 1st, so you're going to see some things that look different in your SCOIR account on August 1st. I don't know exactly what they're going to look like either, so I can't give you screenshots of it. I can't walk through it because I don't know what it looks like. I can tell you it will pull some information from your profile section here, and it will pre-populate information into the application. So it's going to pull some of this stuff in there, so you'll need to make sure some of these things are accurate so that it pulls them into your application. So that might save you some work. If you're going to do the Coalition, know there's different essay topics. So the essays are not the same as that on the Common App. That being said, do you need to write a whole new essay? Probably not, because one of the essay topics is design your own. So you can just use whatever you wrote on the Common App. And the word limits are the same, so that's fine as well. My recommendation is to maybe consider using this for Rutgers when we get into the fall, maybe some of those regular decision and rolling applications to give it some time to work out the kinks. Some other tips from me. Students, you got a lot of things on your plate, especially when we get back to school this year. You probably remember how you kind of felt like you got run over by a truck in the first week of school this past year, especially coming off of virtual learning and going back to full days. But don't forget, we've got sports, clubs, a million other commitments. You got to schedule time into your calendar to work on college apps because the weeks will get away from you. Right now, you know, it seems like, oh, the year's so long, but I can tell you that every student I met with in the spring said, oh my God, you were right, this year went so fast. And time can really get away from you. So book time in your calendar to work on your applications. Sometimes the house becomes a little bit of a nag zone. And parents, you feel like you are constantly nagging your child to work on your application. This can become a big source of stress in a lot of houses. One of the things I really recommend is thinking about setting time aside one day a week where that is the time and day you will review things and talk about them. And the rest of the time, we have the mutual agreement to not nag our child to work on the applications because they're going to take care of what they need to do. So that one time a week is a time to help set goals for them, help them budget their time for the week based on what's coming up and set goals for what they want to get done, and then leave them alone to get some of those things done. Because I'll also remind you that you are not going to be there with them when they get to college in a year. So they need to learn how to do those things and manage their time well and complete things independently. Keep track of all the details somehow. Though I didn't mention BSMD, but that is a big group that really needs people who are applying to accelerated med programs. You really have to be the most organized out of anybody because you have more requirements than anybody does, except maybe students applying to audition-based programs. You got a lot too. You got to be organized with that stuff going forward, or you will find that you blow by deadlines because schools have early deadlines for those types of programs. Pre-audition, pre-screen requirements, things like that. You got to be ready early or you're going to miss them. And then the door is closed on that school for you to apply. Also, I didn't mention it earlier, create some type of document or note to hold all of your college-related logins and passwords. You're going to have a common application. You're going to have a FAFSA. You're going to have your College Board account. Then you might have other applications that you do. And then all of those schools you're applying to are going to send you more things to create more usernames and passwords. And they all have different requirements as to what they need to be. So find a place to keep it. Students, create your own. Make sure you're using your own email address, not your parents' email address for these kinds of things. Because also then when we're working on it in school and we don't know how to get into it, then when we reset the password, it comes to your email, not your mom and dad's email. So we want it to be able to come right to your phone so we can reset the password and keep moving and addressing whatever your questions are. Use the resources, ask for help. Students, if you are not an organized person, now is the time to start acquiring some of those skills and using the support network around you to help you get there. And so that could be your parents, it could be other adults in your life, your counselor, me. There are some students out there who are like better organizers than me. They roll up in my office and they've got like color-coded spreadsheets and planners with highlights of different colors that mean different things. Like that friend, you need to buddy up with them and have them help you create a system. And make sure you're asking questions. These are really my top, kind of tips. A lot of it really boils down to following directions, trying not to procrastinate on everything, using the time you have when you have it, and really, really asking for help. There's a lot of you. I mean, there's 580 some on rising seniors this year. We don't all lay eyes on all of you all the time, and you can just kind of float through without any personal contact if you don't reach out or respond when people are emailing you. Like I'll email kids when I see like you haven't sent out applications. I will start emailing you and saying like, hey, do you need help? Do you need help? And when students reach back out, we can get an appointment scheduled like the next day. And oftentimes they're like, hey, I wish I kind of reached out sooner. I probably would have been a heck of a lot less stressed if I had asked for help. But the ones that don't respond, like, I'm not coming to your classroom to ask you, and neither is anybody else. So you need to respond and you need to reach out if you need help. And don't try to like hoe your own road. Work with the process that we've put in front of you. We've done it because it works, and we know it's how we can get everybody through the process on time. I'm going to send out follow-up resources, including, again, a link to this, as well as some of these other links that have been sprinkled throughout. And I think that is the end of my presentation part. So I can take questions. Chat works well. If anyone wants to unmute, you can unmute. This will all be up on YouTube in probably like a day or two. I have to save it and probably edit something, and then I will put it up. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you don't, have a wonderful evening. I hope I'll see some of you next week for the Common App walkthrough. That'll also be recorded too for those that are lucky enough to be on vacation next week. And have a great night for those of you that are leaving.